am satisfied with the book in that, you know, I worked on it on and off for about 4 years. The whole time I never thought ahead to whether people would read it, what they'd make of it if they did read it. And so it's been actually quite touching to me that it has traveled around the world, you know, and people everywhere I've been to have said some quite moving things about the book. You know, how much one part of it meant to them, how shocked they were about the kind of abuse my mother experienced. So that has been very rewarding. There were a couple of reasons why I wrote the book. The first isn't very romantic, I'm afraid. It's that I wrote the book to raise money for our campaign in Malta, so all proceeds from the book go to this foundation we set up. The second is there was a lot of disinformation about my mother's life, her case, the murder, her work. And it became very obvious that there weren't many people who could set the record straight. I happened to be one of them because I am her son. And so it became about that, about setting the record down of what she was really like, what she worked on, why she was killed, how she was killed. But then when I started writing the book, it became its kind of own reward. You know what I mean? Like it gave me a reason to speak to my father in some depth about her and their marriage, my grandparents. And I think a really nice thing to see has been that people in Malta really are reading it, like a lot, and that really surprised me, because that's where you want it to be read, you know, more than anywhere. That's where the problems around disinformation were greatest. It's where the stakes were highest. And it's the weirdest thing going home now and seeing it in shop windows, or seeing people carrying it. It's been quite odd. Yeah. I think everything. I think because it is quite personal, and you kind of, because you write alone and you spend years writing alone, you develop this wrong idea that you're the only person who's seeing the book. You forget that a point will come where it goes out and people will buy it and read it. And by the time it gets to that point, you forget how much personal stuff there is in there, you know, about her, about me, about my parents' marriage, about what she was like. And suddenly everyone knows it, you know? Suddenly it's like having invited thousands of strangers into the house. But you just have to get past it. Like I remember I happened to be in Malta around publication. It was actually not meant to be out in Malta, but booksellers there started selling it ahead of the agreed publication deadline. And I was on this smaller island, Gozo, and then out of nowhere heard the voice of one of my best friend's ex-girlfriends going, "Paul, I have your book!" And I just went, "Good," you know? I'm like, But anyway, I had to get over that pretty quickly. So she was famous. She was, you know, not just the best known journalist in the country, but really one of the best known people, full stop. But people only knew her in one dimension. She was a journalist who wrote about these stories. And that was a real problem, really, because there was a campaign to dehumanize her, and which was effective ultimately, you know, that ended in her murder. And it was effective because people only saw her in that one dimension. they forgot that she was a mother, that she did have a lot of other interests, like food and music, that she was once a girl, once a teenager. And I think the book was the first full account of her life. And I think it deepened this sense of loss and this sense of tragedy, that she went from being a case to being a person who was murdered. And that is also another reason that I started seeing more clearly once I had started the book, this kind of feeling that her murder had become bigger than her life, that she was only talked about in terms of the murder. Yeah, I hope I have done a little of it. It is an attempt at restoring some of that humanity. And a book is one way of doing it. It's really the only way I knew how to do it. And again, I am very touched that people are reading it. And I'm moved by it. Yeah, you would have liked her. She was a very fun person, actually. A very funny person. And it's weird, it's been almost exactly 7 years. It was the 16th of October 2017. And my eldest brother described it as being one long day since that day. And it really does feel like that. You remember that day perfectly. You remember the details of so much of what happened on and around that day. But then obviously so much else has happened, but it feels like it's been crammed into a day, the whole thing. And we have seen a lot of progress in the murder case, which has been good. But there are days where you just remember, your mother's been carved on. And that's all. There is nothing that can change that. I think it is always a question of degree. I think Malta is extremely corrupt in that the state was completely captured during the last 5 years of her life by an organized crime group that really used government to further its own interests. Everything was about furthering its own interests. We privatized our entire healthcare sector for them, our energy sector for them, parts of our infrastructure for them. So the state really was just a tool they used to enrich themselves. And it's why in the talk I gave this morning I said there is a reason why they killed her rather than a policeman or a magistrate, like the famous cases in Sicily. It's because the state had already fallen apart. The police posed no real threat. The judiciary neither. Parliament. There was just no problem there for them. It was my mother, really. I do think, though, that corruption works in very similar ways in different places. Definitely across former British colonies, and really because they inherited the same kind of institutions. So in Malta, what we realized under our former Prime Minister is just how powerful the executive is, and that the Prime Minister's office has unchecked powers, control over the police, the judiciary, and the prosecutor, which always mattered, but then really mattered when we got a very corrupt Prime Minister. And interestingly, I started working as a journalist a bit before, but really when Boris Johnson became the UK's Prime Minister. And again, it's a question of degree. Nothing There was never the kind of not even close, the corruption in Britain and Malta. But the issues under Johnson were the same, that he had these enormous powers over appointments across really a lot of the state, including Parliament, right? Every Prime Minister sent people to the Lords. He abused it probably more than most. And it's then that I began realising that it's a kind of rule of law issue, and you have people who weaken it openly from above, like Johnson, Trump, obviously Putin, Orban in Hungary, and then you have the more insidious kind of corruption, which is what we had, that the Prime Minister, the real damage he caused was to starve institutions of resources, to quietly pack them with cronies. And there were very naked corruption scandals, but really it was that effect, the kind of hollowing out of the state, which was in the end completely devastating. I think so. The book spends a lot of time on Malta's history, because it became obvious that was the story, that the way Malta came to be as a state, the way its culture formed, the way its languages set, were all historical questions, and informed Malta's class system now, its politics now, and the institutions we have are a product of colonialism. I mean, my mother was born 2 weeks before independence, and those institutions we inherited were just not reformed in the way that we needed them to be, to become a functioning democratic state in a globalized world. And it was those weaknesses really that made corruption so possible. It's a funny place also in that it is small. When I was growing up, the population hadn't even reached 500,000. It's physically small, it's a little archipelago. Yet there are all these layers of secrecy, and it is just amazing how you can keep things secret in a place like that. But people really manage. It is. It's always been that kind of place, maybe. A big part of it is that the family in it, because the state was always very weak and is very young, people never saw it as a legitimate thing, or enough of a legitimate thing to say report a crime to the police as much as they should. So the family, the nuclear family, becomes the central unit. Things are kept within it. They only go outside if the family needs a favour from some politician. And so the links that are formed are from a nuclear family up to their MP or their political party, but never from one family to another horizontally. And I don't know, that was obviously always the case when I was growing up there. But I think I realised after her murder, because there was so much division unbelievably over the murder, that we don't even have a shared understanding of murder, like that people couldn't even say this is bad, this is what we now need to do. It was, again, the country split, and I thought, if we don't even have a shared understanding of murder, then how can we, what is the democracy doing, There can be no shared understanding really of anything. Look, it's tiring, and it's been 7 years now, and we also have our own lives, I have a day job, but I do feel optimistic, and that's because we started from such a low point. In October 2017, I mean, things were desperate. It was unthinkable that we would get anywhere, let alone to the point of criminal proceedings against all these men, a public inquiry, all these corruption inquiries, and to a country where we do now have a proper sense of civil society, where we do have NGOs, not connected to a political party or the church or whatever. And that is a fundamental change in a country. You know, a rooted change.
It's a great
I think it will, because Malta just never had it. You know, it wasn't a question of we had it and then it went away. And it was a big problem because we always relied on other political or religious organizations to motivate change. And so it was always limited to those interests of those organizations. But now it's not. You know, now it's people saying, this is wrong, we don't want it. People affecting change outside the political process, so through the courts, the press, the judiciary, and that's what you want. That is a healthy country, you know. All those different parts, kind of moving often in different directions, but that is a healthy democracy. Never. I'm not running for office. I mean, I miss Malta a lot more as I get older. Maybe I think I just don't know. I don't feel. I think there may come a point where I'd like to move back. I miss my father, I miss my eldest brother, who both still live there. I don't know, I've become a bit soppy about it, I think. But the country's changing a lot, you know. Every time I go back it looks different. I get lost now driving around. We'll see.